Welcome to the Pop Cult Podcast. Here are your hosts, Ariana and Seth.
This is Seth.
This is Ariana.
And this is the Pop Cult Podcast. We'll be reviewing two more recent releases. A little later, we'll be talking about Jesse Eisenberg and Kieran Culkin in A Real Pain. But first, we'll be reviewing The Order. A string of violent robberies in the Pacific Northwest leads veteran FBI agent Terry Husk, played by Jude Law, to a white supremacist group. The group plans to overthrow the federal government. So this is the latest film from Australian director Justin Kurzel, who has made quite a few movies. We've only ever seen one of his movies, to my knowledge, and that is Nitram, which was a 2021 film starring Caleb Landry Jones as Martin Bryant, who was a real person that committed the worst mass shooting in Australian history, and it led to them issuing like massive gun control restrictions.
Yes.
And so that film, the incident only happens off screen in the very last seconds of the movie. And instead in Nitram, you're following him around. You're seeing things often from the point of view of his parents. Mm-hmm. And it becomes very clearly obvious that he is a mentally unwell young man and his parents aren't giving him the help that he needs. And so I thought that was it was an interesting way to do a biopic of such an infamous person.
Yeah, especially with the real footage of this person as a child who was being interviewed by a local station because he had burnt himself at some point with some...
there had been like a fire or something.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is Kurzel's latest. It is an American production, The Order. However, it stars two non-Americans, I realize, two British men, Jude Law and Nicholas Hoult, who I think there's a connection between them. And I'm trying to figure out what it is. I know they both... What is it? There has to be a connection between them, I feel like. With as many movies as Jude Law has made, I feel like he's been in something else that Nicholas Hoult has been in, but I can't think of it.
Nah, I feel like we would have probably already known, or there would have been a video talking about them being reunited.
Or there's also a film, or there's also Ty Sheridan in it as well, and Journey Smollett, who we'll talk about in a little bit. So, Jude Law. What are your thoughts on Jude Law?
I think he's one of those actors that becomes more fascinating to watch the older he gets, especially because when you think about in his past, sort of this playboy, sort of this like he kind of knew he was handsome and was going around cheating on people, being unfaithful, being in like romantic comedies that made no fucking sense in my mind.
Well, I think his like American breakout was The Talented Mr. Ripley, where he plays
Nikki.
Yeah, it's the friend of Tom Ripley's who becomes his first victim.
Yes.
And I remember him being like an incredibly hot commodity in the early 2000s, all the way through like to 2009 or so. Because I remember AI he was in, and that was, they made a big deal out of that. There was that Captain Tomorrow, or Captain something in the World of Tomorrow. It was that 1930s, 40s set black and white thing with Gwyneth Paltrow and Angelina Jolie.
Yes, I remember watching that, and it just made no sense to me.
Well, it was just the guys who made it were special effects people primarily.
Yeah.
And it was a great showcase of their special effects.
Yes, I don't know if that was before or after like Frank Miller's like
Sin City. I think it was like before.
Yeah, because I think it influenced it about being like this black and white.
Well, what happened was with digital my guess is that with digital cinematography, that allowed post-production to do more things than when you had celluloid film, which kind of limited you. If you can put it into a computer, it's kind of limitless. How can you manipulate the image?
Well, I think it also does better when you do special effects on it, because at the end of the day, when it is in color and we do this weird thing, it's like they're going, it's nighttime, guys. It doesn't look that
day
great.
For night. I would say, so coming to this movie, it is, one thing I was pleased about was that it is a stylish movie.
Yes.
It's it's the kind of movie that easily could have been just the most like straightforward, dull, like not much effort put into shooting it, but they clearly thought a lot during production and post-production about color grading and lighting and making the images have texture to them.
Or even just the thought process of two people talking. There's a scene between Ty Sheridan and someone else that is only like one scene where when he's looking to her, it's a little bit of a higher angle, and then when she's looking at him, it's a lower angle, even though we're getting the shots like through their shoulders.
But then the eye lines still match and
The
everything.
eyelids
Yeah.
are matching, so it just kind of like is it's just like there's
It's
thought
it's
put
yeah,
in.
it's someone who cared about what they were making.
Yes.
And I think that's the big difference because there can be movies like this that I just are complete snoozes for me or I wouldn't even sit down and watch. And that's mainly because so often they're just kind of churned out factory movies.
Yeah, I mean, this could have
We'll,
easily,
we'll get into the flaws. We'll get
yeah,
into the flaws. But so Nicola or Jude Law, that's what we're talking about. I was thinking about what we've seen him in recently, and the HBO work he did was really good. Which in this, it was in 2020.
yeah,
We got The Young Pope and The Third Day.
yes,
And I think in both of those, especially The Third Day, that was where I was like, oh yeah, Jude Law as an old aging man appeals to me much more than like Jude Law, the dashing, like young playboy kind of
yeah, and
archetype
I
he
think
had
it's
been.
like he's picking roles that are so well that work with it's roles that are not ignoring the fact that like he was a good-looking man and that he has this deep charm about him. There's a movie that he did with Carrie Cook.
Carrie Coon, The
Coon.
Nest. That was a
Yes.
Sean Durkin who did Martha Marcy May Marlene
Yes.
and The Iron Claw.
Where it's sort of like this indication of someone who now the world has come to bite him in the ass kind of thing, right?
Well, he
You,
plays like desperate losers
yes,
really good.
because it's sort of like like they're past their prime and because they're past their prime, they never really had to dwell with making mistakes. And now they don't know how to apologize. They don't know how to slow down or think about the things that they're going to
They're very
do.
impulsive. And
Yes.
that's in the order his character of Terry Husk is that kind of an FBI agent. So that like I never felt that I was on Terry's side.
No.
And the further we go along and the choices that Terry makes, the worse things get. And like the end of the movie is not this sort of triumphant, hero, like he's redeemed himself. It's very dark and very
Yeah,
bleak.
this is a storyline that easily had someone like Sorkin had taken over. They would have put like all these liberal ideas in your head while also trying to have a happy ending for everybody, and then being like, someone on the inside is actually feeding us information. So,
Oh yeah, there
Americans are
yeah,
good.
there's still good people inside of white supremacy, right?
Yeah.
Bullshit. Um, the because I did like what someone said is they really like movies about America made by non-Americans because they don't
Yes.
cater to this sort of patriotic jingoistic bullshit that
And it was very
we
obvious
constantly
towards the
see.
end when it came to the title cards explaining like the influence of a certain book that that the order
Uh,
like shows that
well,
like
because the film is essentially about the Turner Diaries becoming something the FBI is aware of.
yeah, and funny enough, like they mentioned January 6th at the end of this film.
Yeah, because it was a book that there's imagery in the book that clearly has
This is
influenced
a
white
film
supremacy.
that I would probably be like, I would rather watch this than Civil War.
Yeah, yeah. I think if you're gonna watch a movie that talks about the fractures in America and the dark truth behind everything, this is a much better type of movie than Civil War. Civil
Yeah.
War just never chose a point of view.
It doesn't pick a point of view until like you really start to think about the film and the influences and the people he ends up thanking at the end of the
Yeah,
day.
yeah, yeah. So then we also have Nicholas Hoult here in a villain role. And I was trying to think, I don't think we've seen Nicholas Hoult in too many villain roles. Well, though he will be playing Lex Luthor in
Mhm.
Superman. What did we think of Nicholas Hoult as a villain?
I thought he did very well because I think it's also showing you how charismatic and focused this person was. There is not a moment where Nicholas playing Bob Matthews that he feels as if he has any self-doubt. And that is what is needed to watch in order to realize like the people who want to like end America
Are very
but
confident in what they're
are
doing.
very confident, but I'm talking about end America and have white supremacy be
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
reign. I'm not talking about the people that want to bring in equality.
yeah.
This is
This is somebody who wants to impose almost carbon copy hierarchy, except they're just higher on it.
yes.
That's it. That's the only, and that's the thing about white supremacy is that's all it can offer is, hey, you know that hierarchy you hate and is crushing you? What if but you were higher on the ladder?
Yeah.
And it's sort of, well, what if there wasn't a hierarchy at all? Why don't we
Or
contemplate
it's
that?
also sort of like, what if we put socialism, but only for us?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then only for people that have my exact same viewpoint.
Yeah.
Uh, one of the other things I think worked about him is he was not a harsh leader. The
No.
way he spoke to his men was not being nasty or cruel to them. He always had a very calm voice when he talked to them. He does like I mean he kills men that work for him, but they never can see it coming,
No.
and they always feel you always feel like you're his friend. You always feel like Bob, I can trust Bob. That's the mindset you could see in these people
Yeah,
is
I mean like
Bob was one of the only people they could trust.
they do this good thing of showing about like the love bombing that's done very carefully and very subtly
Hmm.
when new people arrive into like his group. They also show the fact that like when the decision has been made, there is no there's nothing up for discussion. He's made the decision and made it very clear to those who are his acolytes that it's just like this is going to be done. It's for the betterment of the group, and that's it. And it's also showing him that he's highly intelligent because it's like he goes into an argument with what, like a former pastor of his or whatever the fuck it was.
Yeah, it's Richard Butler who's supposed to be this who has a more quote unquote legitimate Aryan church.
Yeah, who has a larger church.
And he constantly says, we don't want violence. We just want a place of our own kind of
Yeah.
rhetoric.
And how Bob Matthew gets to the point he's like, I'm tired of the talk. We need action. And because he goes into that action, he gets all this respect.
And then we have two strong supporting characters, I think, in the film. We do have it's Irish actress Alison Oliver as Debbie, Bob's wife,
Hmm.
but I didn't feel like she was in enough of the movie for me to really cast any sort of judgment about her acting. Like
No.
she's fine in what she has, but she really isn't an integral part of the
No,
story.
I mean the only thing that was like interesting about her was basically this indication that Bob picked her because he would always have something over her, right? He put an ad in the paper looking for a woman to share my looking for a white intelligent woman to share my like place with,
Yeah.
like because he bought some land. And
When
he
it seems
selects her, but she can't have children, so they end up adopting. And she's like, she knows that he's gonna want someone who can give him legitimate white children.
Uh, and I think it was, you could tell they'd done some research, a lot of research, because I think that is like something, I don't know if it still happens, but you could find it in the 90s where you'd have these kind of like militia white supremacist dudes and they would put personal ads specifying white because they want to find a woman who was raised in or shares at least rudimentarily these sort of racist ideals.
Or is willing to learn,
Yeah.
is willing to
Who's
give it up
desperate.
because like they'll be like, oh, if he selects me, then I am so special that I need to obey to whatever
Well,
rules he
and
has.
because like the women you see in this movie, like they're not women that grew up in major urban areas. They grew up in rural areas and they don't have a lot of opportunities afforded to them. And so guy says he'll marry her. She gets to have a home that she owns. Hey,
Yeah.
yeah, it's like seems better than like stripping at the bar by the highway off ramp
Yeah, and
or
we also have to
working
realize
like at
like
Walmart.
this is around the time that women were finally being able to have bank
Financial freedom,
accounts.
yeah.
And so the financial freedom wasn't like embedded as deeply
Yeah.
as it could have
It
been.
was something that like had happened over the lifetimes of these women.
Yeah, and so therefore they didn't know what they were getting
Yeah.
into. It's not as if they're getting the same wages or opportunities. And this man has promised to take care of me and whatever young we produce. So let's go.
So the two supporting performances I want to point out here. The first one is Ty Sheridan as Jamie Bowen. Now, Ty Sheridan's an actor who, again, it's kind of like Nicholas Hoult. I'm still waiting for the role
Yeah.
because he's done everything from, big blockbuster movies like Ready Player One, and he played Cyclops in some of the later X-Men movies. And then he does something like this, where it's a little more. It's still a prominent film, but it's not as pronounced. There's not as much of a marketing campaign behind it.
Yeah.
What do we think about Ty Sheridan?
I think he did pretty good in this film. There was nothing really remarkable about him. Um, and it's
He gets some good moments though. There's the outburst scene in the
yes.
police or in the FBI headquarters.
Yes, I like the outburst scene. I also like the fact that he is a softer spoken, more easier kind of guy compared to Terry Husk, who ends up being his partner.
But do we think that this character is propaganda? Because it's one of those. But he's a
Ooh.
good cop.
He's a good cop married to a native.
Yeah, an indigenous woman. And it's like, well, I mean, I'm sure there are young men on police forces that have okay intentions and may have married non-white women. But it's like you're still choosing to be a cop.
Yeah.
And to me, it's like you're still choosing this hierarchical authority that s- reinforces a lot of bad things about American culture.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so, once again, I also have to go, this is a movie based on a true story, but through a fictional lens. So it is going to clean up some of the dirtier things. And I don't know, maybe in real life, that guy was a horrible husband to his wife. Like, I just know this movie character version.
Yes.
And then we have Journey Smollett as Joanna Carney, who appears to be, she's younger, but a supervisor to Terry. She's sort of his superior.
Yeah.
What did you think of her performance in the movie? Because I think she got some pretty good
I
scenes and
think
moments.
she did very well. Like I did like the fact that she can go toe to toe with Terry no matter what, like verbally. I like the fact that they have this past knowledge about each other, but it's not really stated like out loud. Like for example, Terry keeps using like this excuse about like, oh, I'm up here settling everything before my wife and daughters come. And she's kind of like, yeah, you're up here settling before they come. Like she knows his past history and she knows men like him. So she knows like, okay, he probably has great instinct, but at the end of the day, like he is a liability.
Yeah, there's Mark Maron is also in the movie in a small but I think effective role where he really is acting. Like he's
Yeah.
doing a voice. They have him in a wig. Even like
Hmm.
his body, I think there's some like padding on him or
I think
something.
he makes sure to look like he's
Yeah.
hunched over, like he's
And it's only he only appears, I think, on camera twice during the whole movie. We hear his voice several
yes.
times because a radio host. But like he has a very interesting role. And then there's Odessa Young as Zyla, who is Bob's mistress.
Hmm.
Once again, not a really prominent role, but she does fine with what she has.
Yeah.
Um, I think this movie's strongest elements are, I think, Jude Law.
Yes.
And then I think Kurzel is the director and having a
Hmm.
very, it's clear he has a very distinct point of view of how he wanted to make this movie. And it ended up reminding me a lot of 1970s New Hollywood cinema.
Hmm.
Those movies where we saw people like Bruce Dern and Jack Nicholson and so on kind of come to prominence,
Yes.
where it was the main character wasn't a great guy and you weren't even sure if you were on his side. It's just the movie was told from his point of view. So that's why you see he's in all the scenes kind of a thing.
Yeah, like kind of like the guy that was in The Conversation.
Or I was thinking like the The Last Detail
Yeah.
with Jack Nicholson transporting Randy Quaid, they're like to the naval prison,
Yeah.
and how like Nicholson's playing a guy who is real, you would not really want to hang around very much,
No.
but you're still like, okay, I get it. Like I understand why he is the way he is, kind of a thing. Um, the one we're going to talk about weaknesses. So here's where I think the film has a weakness. I think it lacks a perspective on either the investigation that's happening or the social commentary. And around midway, the film seems like it's starting to get cold feet about its premise, about how hard it wants to go.
Yeah, I think that, and I think it's also, we don't ever feel as if any of this is a shock or that it's extremely wrong because the fact that, like, for example, it's hard to say, like, because to me, I'm thinking in the film, for a lot of it, we're supposed to view it as Jamie's point of view as the investigation, but it's torn between Jamie and Terry's, right?
I feel like it's mostly, I think it's Terry and Bob are the two point of views.
Yeah. But I'm
Yeah.
talking about like when you're thinking
Oh,
about
the
like
investigation.
the
Yeah.
investigation wise.
But it's sort of like, it doesn't really get into like the procedural nitty gritty of like investigating this crime. That's kind of done in broad strokes and often off camera.
Yeah, because like one of the major things it's supposed to be that like Jamie gets the book and starts reading it. We don't get a moment where like Jamie is like sitting down reading the book and going like, "Oh my God."
But well, you
Um,
wouldn't, though, a scene like that, you're like, would that be too cheesy? Or there needed to be some, yeah, I just feel like there need to be a little bit more information on what was in the book
yeah, and I
because they
understand.
just kind of do a real cursory
Yeah,
glance
and
at
I
it.
understand it probably was like they were just pushing already the 2 hours. They didn't want
Yeah.
to add more. It's supposed to be like once like Terry finds the book in Jamie's home, he's kind of like, "Oh, I didn't know you kept this," and he was like, and Jamie's like, "I didn't think you would take me seriously if I told you about it." And he was like, "Well, now I am taking you serious."
Because the book is delivered to his house, and the implication is Terry sends it to him, right?
No, it was like a stranger.
Oh, so maybe it was like the Richard Butler maybe had it sent to him because he's a
Yeah.
local cop.
Yeah.
Okay, that's because I feel like that never gets directly resolved in the movie about who sent the book to him.
No, and there's just it's just like this thing of like, for example, had that book been delivered to them, wouldn't that cause a stir between Terry and his wife at the fact that they don't know who is coming by the house?
That would seem like a threat.
Like that there, or that there was there a threat incoming, especially the fact that they have like biracial kids. There's never like any fear or anger coming from Jamie when it comes to this. He's just kind of like, this is a part of life. And so there's
Yeah,
never a scene that could have been Terry or even just like Joanna just being like, what the fuck is wrong? Like, why aren't you like worried?
yeah. The the overall film, I think, would you recommend to our audience to watch this movie?
Yes.
Hmm.
Even though like there are flaws, I do feel like it should have been tightened a little bit. There is again with the comment that you said before, due to the fact that it is not American director, he does not feel as if
He's not
like
pulling his
he's
punches.
not pulling his punches. And I think to some degree I can understand why you almost want to make it like so easy to get into it because that's how it's supposed to be in this area where they are.
Yeah, like it's not hard to recruit white people to like hate groups in Idaho, kind
Yeah,
of.
and especially because like Terry has a moment that he's like, I feel like I was being recruited. I'm not really sure. And it's this weird thing that you almost want to ask Terry, like, well, what about you that made him think that you needed this?
Well, another thing I want to point out is there are multiple bank robbery scenes in this movie, which is another area where I feel like the film is stretching itself thin. When you think about, let's say, Dog Day Afternoon, that's a movie that settles on the bank robbery is the movie. And so, in that way, that bank robbery feels like nuanced. Or you go to a movie where you have Heat. There are multiple robberies in that movie, but the way that film is structured and those robberies are presented, you really get a sense of like the detail of planning. In this movie, it's sort of like the investigation and the social commentary. The bank robberies are there, but I never felt like I really was like on the ground with them, getting a sense of like, oh wow, look at how much work went into pulling the sequence off.
Yeah, I think there was a problem that they didn't show like the length of time that's going through, and then even just a quick summary of like them going into plans of like maybe watching one of them walk into that bank and like do a scouting of it, or like, and then juxtapose that to the FBI trying to figure out what next bank are they going to hit.
Yeah, because by featuring the bank robberies in the movie, it draws attention to them in a way that if the bank robberies were happening off screen and they were reading about it afterwards in the papers, I think that would have created space to kind of allow the investigation more room to develop
Yeah,
or something
like
else. Yeah.
maybe also like Bob Matthews explaining why is it that they're like, we're no longer going to like hit the banks, we're going to go hit the trucks. Because it's sort of like him establishing we've already made, or like
They're going to
we
be looking for us at the
we
banks
made a
now.
pattern, so
Yeah.
let's do something different.
Well, and then when they do rob the truck near the end of the film, I did think that was like a really well done sequence.
Yeah,
And I wouldn't have minded if that was like the only robbery we see on camera, or maybe cut out the middle one, but
yeah,
then and just show the aftermath, because the aftermath of the robbery is the only thing that really matters in that scene anyway.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think The Order is a film worth watching. It feels relevant. It's got strong performances, I think, in it.
Yeah.
Though I still feel like I'm waiting for like Nicholas Hoult. I'm still waiting for that role. He's inching closer to 40. So I'm wondering like
Yeah,
when
I mean,
maybe he'll be like one of those actors who just when he gets into middle age, that's when I suddenly
yeah,
click with
the
the
thing
actor.
is,
Yeah.
like, this was not like a bad role. I
No.
think the role was executed the way it needed to be, because if then it would have become cartoonish.
But I think for me it's I'm still waiting to see Nicholas Hoult make choices that like get me excited.
I think it's also like it probably was like there is a lack of intensity of maybe like watching him like
But
alone versus but I think about like the guy that from the prior movie, this director that we saw, like he was so intense even in his silence.
yeah.
But again, you like that was a mentally unwell
Well, you can
person.
just think about Jude Law in this movie. There's lots of choices Jude Law is making where it's not dialogue, it's just a look or a reaction. And
Yeah.
those are things Jude Law has to like choose. And maybe Curzel gives him guidance. But like the little like knowing smirks from him or the sort of like moments where he has like an emotional breakdown,
I think
it's very interesting to watch him work. When I think of
yeah.
Nicholas Hoult, I'm more like, what's Terry doing when Nicholas Hoult is on screen? I'm like, I want to see Jude Law because Jude Law just sitting there at a desk is interesting to watch.
I mean, what I love is like Jude Law trying to intimidate someone, and he has a nosebleed in the middle of it.
Well, yeah,
And
yeah, like, oh yeah, think about that. Yeah, the jail cell scene, the way he crushes that guy against the bars. I'd never seen anyone do anything like that in a movie during interrogation, and it was just like, well, he's so fucking unhinged.
yeah,
But
but
then,
then like the nosebleed makes you realize, oh, he's not indestructible. This is an old man who's not taking care of himself.
yeah, but once again, I would still recommend it, and it does have me very interested to check out Kurzel's other films, I think. Mismatched cousins David and Benji tour Poland to honor their grandmother. Their adventure becomes complicated as old tensions resurface while exploring their family history. This is the second feature film directed by Jesse Eisenberg. His previous film I have not seen, When You Finish Saving the World with Julianne Moore and Finn Wolfhard,
Okay.
which he also wrote and directed. It was an A24 film, that one. I believe this is a Neon film, or no, Searchlight Pictures, uh, starring Jesse Eisenberg as David and Kieran Culkin as his cousin Benji. Uh, General thoughts on A Real Pain.
I connected to this film a lot more than I anticipated to.
Mhm.
I thought it's those films that we've talked about before that we miss watching, right? The films that like were really well written. It didn't have to be beautifully shot, but that you could tell that there is like an emotional connection there. I really liked it. more than I thought I was going to. And I know that it also comes with some flaws, even though it's not perfect, but I think it still hits certain things. What about you?
Uh, Part of me wanted to kind of be like Siskel and Ebert, and you're Ebert, and I go, uh, Roger, you couldn't be more wrong. No, no. I didn't. I don't think I loved it as much as you loved it, but I also didn't think it was a complete disaster.
Yeah.
I saw someone on Letterboxd who gave it, I think, a star and a half, and said they walked out 20 minutes into the movie, and they said it was insufferable. But I do kind of understand where they're coming from.
Yeah.
I do. It did have me thinking a lot because most of the films I enjoy, or the movies I enjoy the most, are, especially contemporaneously, are non-American films. I think right now, most American films just aren't as good as like foreign productions. If we're talking about things like South Korea, if we're talking about like Italy or France, like their film production is really good.
Yeah.
Um, American films, and so I was trying to pinpoint what is it that was like a little abrasive to me with this movie. And I think what it is American films seem to inherently have some level of sentimentality in them. Well, I have found European films just do not have sentimentality about them. They're pretty stark.
Okay.
Now, I'm sure if I found more commercially popular European films or things that were made as more crowd pleasers, they just don't get as much international attention. And I mean, we've walked by cinemas here in the Netherlands where I've seen posters for Dutch films that do look like they're attempting to crowd please,
Yeah.
right? Then I might go, oh, I see that's present like in European cinema. But at least in the movies that come across my radar, the ones that most people become aware of, there does seem to be this very stark contrast in how stories of humanity are presented.
Hmm.
That said, I did enjoy how this movie ended because it didn't end how I thought it was going to. I thought it was going to end in some sort of grand realization and resolution. And instead, Eisenberg chooses to end it in a way that is authentic and honest to the way family members do allow lines of communication to deteriorate over time.
Yeah.
Um, so we'll jump into talking about the performances in the movie. Uh, Jesse Eisenberg here has clearly put himself in the supporting role to Kieran Culkin, who I would say is the main character. In
Yeah.
that, even if Kieran Culkin's character of Benji is not in a scene, what he's done is driving that scene forward in
Yes.
terms of conversations with other people. So, who do you want to start by talking about first, Kieran or Jesse?
Let's start with Jesse.
Our good friend Jesse.
Yep.
So Jesse Eisenberg, we have, I don't know, when was the earliest you became aware of him?
Ooh, I think it's a little bit before Zombieland. He did that film with Christian Stewart, which I never watched.
Adventureland is that,
Yeah,
which I did see. Yeah.
I didn't see, but I just like I saw so many trailers for it.
I think that was kind of his big breakout. I remember him from even further back because I'm a cool kid like that. He was in a film called Roger Dodger. With He's one of those actors who has like one of those names. It's like a Dermot Mulroney, but it's not the other guy. It's Campbell Scott.
Okay.
And it's Jesse Eisenberg and Isabella Rossellini's in this movie, Elizabeth Berkley, Jennifer Beals. It was one of those movies that came out in the early 2000s when like digital cameras were really making a boom and you started to see this sort of explosion in independent filmmaking.
Yeah.
And I even think it was like an IFC release or something like that. But he plays the nephew to Campbell Scott, who is this famous womanizer to his nephew. And his nephew comes to visit him and slowly finds out like his uncle actually doesn't know how to talk to women that well, but it's not done as like a farce or a comedy.
Okay.
It's done as like a comedy drama.
Okay.
So it's a coming of age story about that character. So that's the first time I ever saw him. And then I remember seeing him in The Squid and the Whale, one of Noah Baumbach's early movies.
Yeah.
And then eventually The Social Network, that was kind of the movie that catapulted him into being, everybody knew who Jesse Eisenberg was,
Yes.
kind of. I find in this movie particularly, I was surprised by how much acting he was doing,
Oh yeah.
but not in an obnoxious, like obviously acting way.
Yes, yes, yes. Because I recently watched him in Fleshman is in Trouble.
Fleischman,
Fleshman.
which is the sequel to Northern Exposure, right?
Yeah, totally. Funny enough, he does play a doctor.
You know, it'd been funny if he turned out to be Fleischman's son from Northern Exposure, and it was like he's getting into trouble now.
But it was, if anything, like the most close to what I see from his interview personality and when it came to a character, while also being selfish and neurotic and weird.
Very autistic.
Yes. Um, in this one, it is way toned down. Like, yes, you can be like, yes, this is a neurotic, nervous person, but an
This
actual
is a
day to day.
this is an autistic person that had more supports when they were
Well,
growing
no,
up.
this is the neurodivergent because he does have OCD.
That is true. Yeah, he does
So
have
he's
that.
neurodivergent. Um,
But he's medicated. He
yes.
seems to have his life in order.
Yes.
And that's what marks the big difference between him and Benji.
Hmm.
So what did you think of Eisenberg's like performance in the movie?
I thought it felt realistic and grounded. Um, it felt like it rung true to someone that you would actually meet or could meet, like that's from New York and has a Jewish heritage.
What I liked about the character and this decision Eisenberg made, especially in being Jewish, and the film being about them visiting uh, places in Poland where Jews were like summarily executed, he doesn't ever have a strong emotional reaction, this character, to being there.
No.
And that's on purpose, of course, because it's Benji has such an emotional reaction to being here. But I thought that was so interesting that he would choose to have David, like he's taking it in, but it does feel like someone who is that many generations removed, who lives in America and doesn't know anything other than this sort of Western life in New York City, where he's like, being a Jew in Poland during World War II to him is this kind of alien experience. Like he understands the weight of it, he understands the intensity of it, but he just can't really feel it in the same way that Benji
Or
is.
he's not letting it define his life or define this moment.
Yeah, he's sort of like, and he's also doing this for Benji. He's not really doing it for any other
Yeah.
reason. Uh,
And we find that out later
yeah.
on.
And it's one of those where you would assume, based on the character types, oh, David would be the type A guy who's like, we need to plan this, we need to go and see it. And that Benji would be kind of the, hey, I'm just laid back and I don't care. And they switch that aspect of it.
Yeah.
And that was one writing choice that I think was smart. It went
Yes.
against what you anticipated. And it was against what I thought from the trailers. I thought
Mhm.
like, oh, the opposite. Um, so that brings us to Kieran Culkin as Benji. What did you think of that performance? What were the weak points? What were the strengths?
I thought that he did pretty well. Like, this is a person that if you were to tell me, like, they're in the midst of a mental breakdown, but they are somehow wildly charming and lovable, I could totally get that. I do like the fact that they're supposed to be like this loser aspect about him that only a few people seem to pick up on or focus on entirely. Um, he feels so complicated at times. I think the problem, but again, it's just like Eisenberg is doing the same thing where these are actors that we are expecting certain things from or have seen repeatedly, like Culkin being very quick to talk, very
Or very
like
quick in how he talks. Is very
he's
fast.
very fast, and then like shooting out an insult without meaning to, but then following it with a compliment. It's thankfully like this isn't like you're not going to be seeing like
This isn't Roman Roy,
yeah, this
but
isn't
you
Roman
you
Roy
can
from
see the sort of framework that Culkin operates on
yeah.
that he was using when he played Roman
And
Roy,
the
and
thing
you're
is
seeing it
like
here.
as someone who has seen him in other stuff, like the reason he is picked for a lot of is because he's quick and witty, right? You think about like when he's like with Michael Cera in Scott Pilgrim Saves the World. He plays the roommate. He's supposed to be like the sat.
Detached, sassy guy.
Yeah. Which like he does very well.
And like, but one of my things with Kieran Culkin is every character he plays is a slight variation on every other character he plays. Now, the strong part about this movie
Yeah.
is that he does capture the sort of manic, um, emotionally unwell aspects of Benji.
Yeah.
And he layers that into the Kieran Culkin jackass framework.
Yes.
And that works to an extent, but it does have me thinking, can he play someone who doesn't have that framework? That's what I'm interested to see Kieran Culkin do, is play a character I would never imagine he could play and fucking nail it.
Yeah, I like we were talking about the fact that to me, it's almost like he's dancing on that line of Robert Downey Jr., right?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying,
There's like the potential to become a caricature. And I don't want
yeah,
him to, because I think he makes very interesting choices. We were talking about that before. His choices and Eisenberg's choices are really interesting here, but they're still both, they have this like public persona or something that they feel has to be present in their work.
I don't, for Eisenberg, I think it's just he already is a neurotic person.
Yeah, that's true.
So it just feels like it's gonna come through no matter what. So he's testing the grounds by becoming a writer and director, which I think is fantastic. I think for Culkin, it's going to be a little bit more difficult as he ages because, as much as, for example, I do enjoy Robert Downey Jr. at times, to me, he does better as a supporting character
You think
now.
about like Oppenheimer.
Yeah,
I thought he was good in
Oppenheimer,
that. Yeah.
he did
Yeah.
amazing, and he was not Robert Downey Jr. But I
Yeah.
also think about your favorite comfort film, The Zodiac.
And he's playing a variation of Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it works because he's not the main character
Yeah.
all the time, and he's a broken character.
And so, well, that's where we get into the conversation about character actor versus like main starring actor.
Yeah.
And I feel like with Kieran Culkin, what I would like to see from him is, can you play quiet and intense?
Yeah.
Because he's got the intensity, but his intensity often is presented in like a loud way. And this is loud depressed as opposed to Roman Roy, which is loud brat. Which is different than what was the other Culkin performance I mentioned,
Scott Pilgrim one
which
with
is loud,
Sassy
which is
Patch.
loud sassy.
Yeah.
And so, or loud gay sassy or something. And so it's everything has that loudness to it. And I start to think of other actors. We were talking about New Hollywood in our review of The Order. And I go back to those actors. So you think of a Jack Nicholson. You go to a movie like Five Easy Pieces. He's playing a different character than he became known for really playing in his later years. And in his later years, he kind of slid into this archetype or this sort of persona that, oh, when Jack Nicholson is in a movie, that you think of like As Good as It Gets or something, where it's like, oh, he's like this sort of snarky, devious, mischievous kind of guy. And I felt that was limiting for Nicholson. And so when I would see him in something like About Schmidt or even The Pledge, that Sean Penn movie he made, that was so interesting to me because it was so antithetical to what the Nicholson persona had become.
Yeah.
And with Culkin, he's still young enough. He's just in like his, I think, mid late 30s, that I don't want him to fall into this kind of archetype, though I could see how in Hollywood that's almost job security because you know which parts that you'll be up for. It's easier to tell, like, oh, I can go for that part because that matches my energy.
Yeah, and also like it lessens the ability to have to like audition.
Yeah.
I think it also will really highly depend on the director. Because a lot of times I always go back to that Julianne Moore quote that she's like, whatever my best performance was because the director had pushed something out of me.
Yeah. And I think Eisenberg, second feature film, decades of experience as an actor. I think you can see it in the movie. I think this is a movie where the performances are a little stronger than the other elements.
Yes.
But again, like Kieran Culkin, it's because I love watching him so much. I want to see him do different things.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like he's so engaging to watch. And the reason that I was just like, oh, I really like this film is you can tell like when he is like, okay, there's a group of people I have to perform. I'm talking as this like as the person,
As Benji,
as
he's
Benji.
always performing for people.
And then like being charismatic, but then also letting certain words slip that you know that it's insulting, but then still managing to be lovable. And then you could also just see this tired and weariness about him, but it's like he just can't stop himself.
So, like, in some ways, is the role a comment on his persona,
Yeah.
where he's the end of the movie, he's alone and he's the quietest throughout the whole movie, just sitting, looking into the camera, completely like exhausted.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I could see that. Uh, I think the film does a decent job of balancing the ideas of joy and pain in a very authentic way. Uh, I think between the Benji and David dynamic, what I detected was that there was an element of communication that was palpably absent between these two cousins.
Hmm.
And it's something that they seem to acknowledge. Like, it's without saying out loud, you can tell that they know this, but they also seem incapable of repairing it.
Hmm.
And that felt very true to life with, like, you think of friendships or even family members where like that relationship has drifted over time and now you're like, I don't even know how I would even like repair it at this
Well, I think
point.
it
Like,
also like reflects the fact that like they were falling into a pattern that they no longer wanted to be a part of.
when it was a pattern in which their grandmother seemed to be this uh fulcrum in the center of, that she was kind of an object upon which they orbited. And now that she's gone,
Yeah,
they
and they also
don't
they
really
both
know.
had
Yeah.
different relationships because Eisenberg's character was like afraid of her, while like Culkin's character is supposed to be that like that was his favorite person in the world, despite the fact of the heartbreak that your favorite person in the world might have had criticisms about you, but never said it to your fucking face. Or like maybe, yeah, she was your favorite person in the world. That did not mean that she did not harm or affect you in some fucked up way. Or like how the Holocaust could have fucked up this whole family in different manners because of
Intergenerational trauma.
intergenerational trauma. And it's like how Eisenberg's character, I do like the fact that even though there are times that he crosses lines that he should not cross, he is also just being like, I am extremely privileged compared to my cousin. I have a child that I adore. I have a wife that I love who loves me back.
He has like a job he doesn't hate
He has a job that he doesn't hate, even though Culkin thinks it's like horrible.
because he sells banner ads on the internet.
Yeah.
But he's like, it's one of those jobs where he probably doesn't have to think that much about it.
Well, like the way that he was like, well, your favorite website that's for free would not exist without
Yeah, the ad.
this. And how because Culkin is so charming and all over the place, we have no idea what he does for money. We have no idea what it is
Yeah.
that he like is doing. He's
It's hinted that like his life is not in a good place and it's probably going to get worse after the film
and like
ends.
he's elusive even to it because like Jesse's asking him, so after this, what are you gonna do? And he's like, oh, my friend's gonna re-roof da da da. And he's like, but what are you going to do?
Yeah, it's like, okay, you help him re-roof his house. After that, what happens
But
then?
it's also, what about you?
Yeah.
What are you gonna do for yourself? What are you doing that you're excited for? And he's almost like, why the fuck do you care? And it's like it that is where you can see like what has happened was he no longer can share himself in that
Well,
manner.
I think what happens is they don't really know each other anymore.
And he's
Like
kind of like
what you know is the child that you were when you spent time around them, but now you live very different lives and you haven't spent much time with each other. You haven't had those conversations.
it is this subconscious thing of him being like, why should I tell you what I'm going to do if you're going to tell me that I'm going to fuck it up anyways? Because like there's conversations about the fact that like Jesse Eisenberg's character used to hang out with him even despite having like a child and like a wife at home.
But because Benji was unattached, he has this very carefree lifestyle that was just exhausting, I think, to David, is what
Yeah,
it
and
was.
like that interesting thing of then like Benji like apologizing because he insulted him, David, and how he's like, I shouldn't have called you a lightweight. You have a child. You were awake like during the day, as if acknowledging like, yes, I have nothing to be awake at during the day for.
Hmm.
And when you also hear the stories that he tells about his grandmother, like he has no one that considers him the most important person in his life or
Hmm.
in their life.
Hmm.
He is alone, but he's willing to perform when there's a group there. He's willing to make the group feel special. He's willing to highlight certain things and then
He's
say things.
willing to, yeah, he's willing to say criticism that's hurtful at first, but he follows it up by sort of unpacking it.
Yeah.
Um, and I think early on, that is one smart thing that Eisenberg does in the script to communicate to us something is wrong. Is we have Eisenberg who keeps calling, or we have David who keeps calling Benji, telling him, make sure you're at the airport then, try and give him this advice. And then meanwhile, Benji's been at the airport for hours.
Yeah.
And like we even see Benji at the airport before we meet David, and there's something sad implied in that. Like that he didn't, and then whenever they at the end of the film, David leaves the airport, we never see Benji leave the airport. And I think that's an incredibly sad thing
Yeah.
because it just seems,
He has nowhere to go.
well, because airports are culturally, they're points of transition. You don't stay in airports. An airport is a hub that you go to in order to get somewhere else. And the fact that Benji is stationary inside a place like that implies he's going nowhere.
Yeah.
And
And
that
like the sad thing of him saying to David, you meet the craziest people waiting
you
here.
see, he says that a
And
couple
then it's like
times.
he's
He's
probably
one of the
thinking,
crazy
I'm the
people.
crazy person
Yeah,
now.
he's the crazy person you meet at the airport that just sits there all day. Um, the there are several supporting performances, but the one for me that really, really stood out was Will Sharp as James.
Yeah.
And Will Sharp is an actor and filmmaker we are quasi familiar with. We watched his British series Flowers, which I thought was incredible.
Yes.
Is a really good show if you haven't seen it. He was also in The White Lotus, second
Second season.
season. Yeah, he plays Aubrey Plaza's husband
Yes.
in that. Uh, and I'm trying to think if you've ever seen anything else with him. I know he's made some other things, but he every time I see him, he's just such an interesting actor to watch. He's one of those actors. There was someone I mentioned a few days ago, Jeff Goldblum.
Yeah.
Jeff Goldblum is an actor. I think we talked about this in the Wicked review. I believe him no matter what role he's in. And
Even though you're like, yes, he's the most Jeffy he's ever been.
but it's like, and even though there is that element of the Jeff Goldblum persona, what he does is he finds that way to meld his charm and charisma into a character.
Yeah, he also manages to be like, yeah, you exist in this world. You know this world.
Yeah. It feels like someone who's confident operating in that world. Will Sharp does the same thing for me. Anytime I see him in a role, I immediately believe whatever character he's playing because there's certain actors where you can feel them putting so much work into it, but then you have a Goldblum or a Sharp, and you know they're putting work into it. They just are magicians and they hide the work. You don't see the thought that went into it. It's the performance. So it's like whenever you have an athlete who's really good at a sport and they become so good that it's just, they can shut their brain off. It just becomes like muscle memory. And it's because they're in a sort of flow state. And that's the vibe I get with like Will Sharp is I don't think he's a northerner. He's from Northern England. I can't say for sure because in Flowers he has a Japanese accent speaking English. Yeah, he's from London. So he's doing a northerner accent in this movie. And that's clearly a choice that he's made. I don't necessarily think Eisenberg would think of that. Maybe he did. I don't know. Maybe it was a collaboration they came up with. And that immediately establishes something about this character for me.
Yeah.
And then the way he chooses to speak and his body language and all of these elements combine to make this very realized character who we don't learn that much about in the movie.
But I believe him to be the tour guide that
Yeah, I'm like, this is what this guy does.
Judaism who isn't Jewish themselves. Like, funny enough, like I believe Jennifer Grey as a single woman who just got divorced, but like she isn't hamming it up, for example. She's not crying in different scenes.
They're not playing cartoons of themselves. There was also an actor in here, and I'm probably going to fuck up his name, but Kurt Egiwan, who is a Afro-British actor who has played Shakespeare. He's apparently in House of the Dragon, which I don't watch, so I wouldn't know. But he also comes across as very believable because he's supposed to be an indigenous African man who's converted to Judaism.
Yes.
And so he's this interesting outlier in the group in that all of them have ancestral connections to Poland and the Holocaust. He doesn't. He has a religious connection to it.
Yes.
And so he is able to provide an alternate perspective to the things that are going on. There were moments that I could tell Eisenberg had really thought out, and they were kind of like little set pieces. There's the photos in front of the War Memorial
Yeah.
statue. There's sneaking through the train to avoid the
Mhm.
conductor catching them without tickets. And then I thought there's the cemetery and then the subsequent rocks on the stoop. And how all of these are like, oh, I could see that Eisenberg probably in his head had like, I want that to be a moment in there. And so it's that way of writing a script where you kind of write out all the moments you want to make sure are in the movie, and then you figure out all the connective tissue between them. What are all the scenes I'll need to be able to get from here to here in order to make that make sense and to make sure that the characters have something to do and
Yeah.
they're changing as the story goes. And so I did appreciate that, where I could really feel that there was a lot of thought put into it.
Mhm.
At the end, I do think it felt like a decent contemporary short story, like
Yeah.
something you might read like in the New Yorker, where it's not going to be a story you're going to remember every detail of, but it's just very satisfying and the ending kind of sticks with you.
Yeah.
Uh,
And I do
Mhm.
think that like Eisenberg does a beautiful performance, at the least to show the love that he has for Benji. And like this thing of like, because Benji is so depressed, Benji can't take that love in. Benji can't fully take it in as much as David is trying. And like I think Eisenberg delivers it so well because he's tearing up, he's crying about it. And he's like, "You don't understand. I wish you had the skill. I wish I had the skills that you have that you don't seem to appreciate."
well, it could also be implied that Jesse Eisenberg has OCD and is medicated. And you could say that the Benji, or sorry, the David character, you could say that the Benji character, his cousin, is an unmedicated, untreated, neurodivergent person without any support systems.
Yeah, and like unfortunately is to the point that it's like because now he's lost his greatest supporter, which could have been his grandmother, he just doesn't know where to go anymore.
Yeah. And then also finding out his grandmother would kind of say not the nicest critical things behind his back
Yeah.
also doesn't help. Uh, would you recommend A Real Pain to our listeners?
Yeah, I think it's pretty good.
I would recommend it. I would say that I think the script for me needed a hint more subtlety, and that's where the sentimentality comes in. I feel like sentimentality is often a blunt emotion in cinema, and so it makes things so obvious, and you have characters kind of saying certain things exactly that my just personal preferences are I like to pull back on that a little bit and allow the audience to kind of make those connections. I do think it was, if you want to see Kieran Culkin and Jesse Eisenberg doing really good performances,
Yeah.
I think this movie definitely has it. Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode of the Pop Cult Podcast. Make sure to check our show notes for all the important links, including to our website, popcult.blog. Also, make sure you're subscribed to be notified wherever it is you listen to your podcast so you'll get notified when new episodes are up. If you visit popcult.blog right now, you're going to find a lot more reviews. And we had started 2025 with a film series I'm calling Hazy Shades of Winter. And it's all movies set in that season, but a wide variety of movies. Coming up next week will be reviews for Eric Romer's My Night at Maud, James Benning's docudrama Landscape Suicide, and the Jim Jarmusch comedy Stranger Than Paradise. We also have a Patreon we'd love for you to join. And if you support us on Patreon, you have several different reward levels to choose from, including the $10 Writers Room level, which is where our patron Matt has donated. And because he donated there, he gets to pick a movie every month for me to watch. This month, I'll be watching the recent release of Carry On and reviewing it. And then next month, for Matt, I'll be doing a soundtrack to a coup d'etat, which I'm looking forward to watching. No matter what level you choose to subscribe at our Patreon, you'll get access to patron exclusive podcasts. We've got a series that we're going to be recording here soon, which means episodes will be released shortly after that, where we're focusing on the films of Japanese director Ryusuke Hamaguchi. And then after that, we have an interesting series we're going to be doing with TV sitcoms that I'll go into more detail when we get to that. Well, our next episode, forgot to tell you that, the next episode of the podcast, we will be reviewing the apocalyptic musical The End, as well as Luca Guadagnino's latest film, Queer. Well, until next time, you keep listening, we'll keep watching. Our podcast music was provided by thepodcasthost.com and Alitu, the podcast maker. Find your own free podcast music over at thepodcasthost.com/free music.